As we have already discussed the first app that was there in Android developers docs. Now let's talk about application fundamentals. From here on, we will be talking about application fundamentals, which will comprise of all the components that you will see while working with Android. We will be understanding and taking some examples, and of course also discuss other possibilities and news that has come up over the years. So the Android apps can be written in Kotlin, Java and C++ languages, which we have already talked about a little bit. Each Android app lives in its own security sandbox. Now I don't want you to get too bogged down by these different terminologies which are coming you are seeing for the first time. But we need to at least talk a little bit about these terminology because this is going to come up time and again in future also, right? So just to introduce these to you, so every application in Android has its own security sandbox, which is protected by the following security features that Android provides. Now, as you already know, you might be knowing that Android is a Linux-based system, and in future there are talks about it getting converted into an OS, which is being developed by Google in itself. But as of now, it's still Linux-based, and each app has a different user. So there's a Linux operating system, and every app behaves like a different user of that operating system, right? So that basically makes sure that there is no security threat while two apps are interacting with the Linux system. They are not actually talking to each other, or they're not getting involved with each other, which might be a security threat. The system assigns each app a unique Linux user ID. I think this comes from here in only. You have the unique Linux user ID for all the apps. Every process has its own virtual machine, so there is no interference involved, and every app runs in its own Linux process. The fundamental behind Android is that it follows the principle of least privilege. What it means is that you will be given only those resources to run your app which your app actually requires, right? So that basically also makes sure that your app is not being a burden to the Android OS. Now let's finally talk about app components. But before that, let me take you to the Android documentation that is available. So here is the documentation which is available for Android. We have already covered this much, and now we will be talking about app fundamentals, right? So we discussed this part, and now we need to get into the app components, right? So here are the app components. So here are the four app components that you will come across. The first one is activities. We have already seen this a little bit in our previous first app that we discussed. And this is basically takes care of anything that is on the screen. So anything that you see on the screen is the responsibility of activities. If you remember, I will take the example of the previous app that we have developed. This is a main activity. So this is the main activity, and it is extending another class which is called as app compact activity. You can also decide to extend only the activity class here, but because we want additional features, we have extended the app compact activity, right? So this is an activity, and it also consists of a layout which is activity underscore main XML here, right? And you can attach these two things using this method set content view, as we have done it here, right? So for example, an email app, this was the another app that we were discussing. Is you can also have an email app which might have one activity that shows a list of new emails, right? So you might be developing an app tomorrow which basically shows all the emails which have come up as a list, and you might be using an activity to do that, right? Every activity has a life cycle, so this is something which we will be discussing at length when it comes to activities later on in core concepts that we discuss again. So for time being, you must know that every activity has a life cycle. I briefly touched upon it when I was talking about onCreate method. So onCreate method is part of the activity life cycle, which is there in any activity. Similarly, there are some 5 or 6 other methods that comprise activity life cycle. Every activity is started, then it gets resumed, then it gets paused, then it can be destroyed, then it can be reinstated. So there are different stages of any activity, and we use such methods to take care of those stages, to perform different actions during those stages, right? Services and broadcast receivers and content providers is something which we haven't seen up till now, so we will not be able to give you any example as of now, because I don't want to start discussing examples for something which you have not even discussed. But we will definitely talk about these things. Services is a general purpose entry point for keeping an app running in the background, right? So if you let's say you are using a music app. As a user, you are listening to music, and you happen to decide that you want to write an email. So when you will switch on to your email app, you will realize that the music does not stop, and that is because the services, they take care of the music getting played when they are when these apps go into the background, right? And as you can see, services do not require a user interface, and that's another good thing about the services, that they do not use any require any user interface. Now let's talk about the other two topics, broadcast receivers and content providers, in our next video. See you.